everyone. So we're going to carry on with our economics, looking at economic disparity in the world and how it changes and shifts. So the nature of economic disparity, and disparity is difference, in case you're curious, just some way. So this is the difference between the haves and the have-nots. So to break it down into probably politically incorrect and inappropriate terms, basically the poor and the rich. So the haves are the rich and the have-nots are the poor, and that's how we break it up. So if the total value of your assets is at least, basically, if we look at this little chart over here, so this is in US dollars. So if you have or own things totaling over $2,000, you are in the world's 50% richest, like the 50 percentile, so the haves. And then the up you go, the more to the 1%, obviously is over $500,000 US is in the 1%. And that is considered like billionaire, like sort of rich type of people. Okay, so that's how we kind of differentiate between the two. So economic globalization has spread money, but it hasn't been evenly distributed to all countries. Rich countries have gotten richer. Poor countries don't see a lot of growth at all or none at all. And we can look at people or countries when it comes to the haves and the have-nots. So despite the fact that globalization has occurred and things have gotten up, it has not been an even distribution of wealth throughout the world. So this little chart here shows the adult population and share of the total wealth in 2017. So more than 70% of the world's adults owe under $10,000 in wealth. This 71% or 70% of the world holds only 3% of the global wealth. The world's wealthiest individuals, those owing over 100,000 in assets, total only 8.6% of the global population, but own most of the wealth of the global population. So isn't that scary? It's terrifying, the difference in the haves, the inequality of that. So this is the percentage of world millionaires by country. So you notice that the majority of millionaires live in the United States here. And then the next biggest is arguably the UK. Here, China now, I believe this is 2017, so it could have gone up a little by now. But we see here in terms of millionaires. We're talking about millionaires. And then this is the 10 billionaires versus world, the GDP, World Program. So top 10 Forbes billionaires. The 10 billionaires, $505 billion. And this is just people. This is just 10 people. And these are countries. These are just countries. This is the greater total goods and services the most nations produce on an annual basis. So the 10 richest people in the world literally have more money than the entire country of Nigeria, or Belgium, or Iran, or Norway, Thailand, Austria. So that's terrifying. That's just people. Those are individuals. Those aren't corporations. Those are just individuals. And this is the global population by income group. So the share of the global population defined as poor. So if you are making less than $2 a day, you are considered poor. And it has fallen since 2001 by nearly half to 15%. Overall, the world has become wealthier compared to the millennium. Notably, those in the middle income bracket have grown. So that's a positive, but not great. So this is high income. So these are our billionaires, our very rich few. These are rich, but not billionaire rich. These are middle class, which is probably most of the world, although low income, well, most of the world is low income, middle income, and then the poor, which probably changed a little bit by now. The world's 8 richest billionaires control the same wealth between them as the poorest half of the globe's population, so 3.5 billion people, which is not good. That is not a good thing. That is not an equal distribution of wealth. A rising tide raises all boats. So these are the people who support the economic globalization. or the critics who say a rising tide drowns those who do not have boats. So that's kind of the argument on both sides of this. So if you are rich, you usually support economic globalization because you're going to get richer. However, the problem is if you don't have, you're not going to get anywhere, which is kind of the nature of the world, which is unfortunate. So when we talk about extreme poverty used to be as living on less than $1 US a day. The poverty line was revised in 2015. Since then, a person is considered to be in extreme poverty if you live on less than $1.90, roughly $2 a day, per day. And there were 2.2 billion people living in extreme poverty in 1970, and there were 705 million people living in extreme poverty in 2015. So the number of extremely poor people in the world is 3 times lower than in 1970, which is something. Almost half of the world, over 3 billion people, live on less than $2.50 a day. And according to UNICEF, 22,000 children die each day due to poverty, and they die quietly in some of the poorest villages on earth, far removed from the scrutiny and consciousness of the world. Being meek and weak in life makes these dying multitudes even more invisible in death. From the, this is poverty facts and stats here. So despite the fact that there is less people living in extreme poverty, there are still people living in poverty, but you are not considered extreme poverty if you are making over $2 a day. You're living on less than $2.50, but you're not considered extreme poverty if you make over $2. So that is, take that for what it is, right? So what causes this economic disparity? There are a lot of reasons for this economic growth to growing. Some countries only have one reason, others have a lot working together against it, and as we will see here. So first off, the colonialism is a big reason. Now we talked about colonialism prior. Colonialism has a huge impact on both the colonizer and the colonized. So when we look back, our big colonies, and I'm going to use the UK here as an example because the UK was the biggest colonizer. So the UK made a lot of profit on a lot of colonies. And then after World War II, in the 1950s, when we had this period of decolonization, they up and left. And the problem is they had stripped the country bare of all the resources and then left huge economic and huge social gaps in the country when they left. They left it in a mess, basically. So it was basically like walking into a clean room, messing it up, and just walking out again. And they left these countries to pick up the pieces, and a lot of them did not have the social or economic supports that they needed in order to be successful. So this allows huge power gaps in a lot of these countries, which then gives rise to some not so nice people taking over and controlling the wealth or controlling kind of how the world works. So unfortunately, these have shaped the world's, and they left them behind, is basically, and they're still trying to play catch up. But the problem is, the gap's growing too big. They can't catch up. They would have to slow down in order for them to be able to catch up at this point. And I don't think a lot of countries are willing to do that. So colonialism has had a huge impact on a lot of that. Africa especially. Africa is still reeling from the colonial impacts it had. Another one is lack of investment. There is hardly money in the periphery nations to invest. No taxes as well, because there's no systems in place to collect taxes, so there's no internal revenue. No one's coming in to invest in the country, and so economic growth is happening very slowly at the time. And if there is people coming in to invest, they're not investing in the people. They're investing in their corporations, which use the people. Population growth. We already know about this. We already know what this means. So we can see Africa, and we already know that Africa already has a huge, large base, which means a lot of babies being born, but not a whole lot making it to adulthood. Asia, we're starting to see a difference flux in there. North America, we're starting to see that stage 5 slow down, right? Less births. And then, of course, we're seeing the same thing in Europe as well. It's a bit of a slowdown as well. So because of the faster growth of these areas compared to the economic growth, the standard of living is getting worse each year in terms of the population growth. Diseases, the more sick people population has, the weaker the economy. And why is this? And we should know why this is, because we're currently living in something similar right now. But in terms of if you are too ill to work, you're not investing in the economy, you're not making money, which is a problem. Foreign debt's a huge issue. Poor countries get a lot of money and aid from the old core countries, so North America, Europe, that sort of thing, and new core countries, even some near core countries contribute to aid, but a lot of money comes from loans. In 1977, 60% poorest countries owed over $550 billion, and by 2007, they had paid $540 billion in loan payments and still owed $523 billion. Isn't that terrifying? War is a big one. War is extremely expensive. It costs both sides, and it's long and painful and very destructive. They fight wars over resources, ethnicity, governments, money. Money is usually a big one. Religion, that sort of stuff. So war is a huge issue for economic disparity. Generally, you're not making money if you're fighting a war. Leadership issues, which is a huge one. So if you don't have someone leading your country that's experienced, that can be a huge issue. No laws. The military is in control, positions of opportunity, corruption in the government. Poor leadership reflects poorly on the country itself. Trade inequalities. Most periphery countries are prevented from competing with core countries. Tariffs, regulations. On top of it, if periphery countries have trade deficits, they're spending more money on bringing in goods than they sell, which is unfortunate, but true, and kind of how the world works at the time. There's also can be a lack of local control. A lot of these periphery countries have very little control over their own decisions. They're controlled by others. MNCs and TNCs, as well as International Monetary Fund, UN, have a lot of say in these countries, and they think they're helping them, and sometimes they're not. They're actually just making the situation potentially worse. So what do we do? What can we do about these things? Developmental assistance. This is what we call foreign aid. The official development assistance, the ODA, it gives money to periphery countries. So Canada spent $5.4 billion in 2014 on foreign aid to help people. There's also private development assistance from NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They get some of their money from governments, but a lot of it comes from private donations, so you donate directly to it. Bilateral aid is money given from one country to another, and multinational aid is when a country gives money to an international organization like the United Nations to help periphery countries. So these are all ways to donate in order to help these periphery countries. A second type of NGOs are called foundations, and these are created by rich individuals to make a difference. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is probably a prime example of that. The Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, just rich people who create foundations to give money. Third type is when the government donates to NGOs. Very often governments will match donations. UNICEF Canada, for example, you'll see somewhere where they say if you donate so much, the government will give equal to. So why do we do this? So why do we give money? So religious and humanitarian reasons. Some countries feel that they have a lot of wealth and they should provide for those in need. There are religious-based organizations who provide funds because there is a belief in a lot of religions in charity to spread the wealth and equality and that sort of fundamental belief. And some people just believe for humanitarian, helping fellow man is a reason for this. This is a reason why we do this. Economic reasons. A lot of the time government's aid is not in money. They can purchase food or equipment to donate to the country. There's an old English saying that give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. So instead of just giving them money to buy food now, they give them the tools to be able to sustain life further on beyond a single day. Historical reasons as well. Some countries hold special relationships with countries with historical ties. For example, old British colonies, countries, Commonwealth countries, we still kind of have a tie there, I guess. So what are some of the problems with this internationally? It's not perfect. Free food floods the market. So if you're giving out free food, demand for domestic food drops. So the farmers trying to sell are not making money, which can impact it. Prices go down, poverty happens. So giving out free food can actually be detrimental to the country. Does not reach those who need it. Sometimes the area that needs the food does not get the food or the money. It's kept in the cities or kept by corrupt politicians in the cities. Sometimes aid is sent that is not useful. So, for example, I'll give you a good one. In Canada, there was Fort McMurray wildfire that destroyed a lot of people's homes. And a lot of people were trying to donate clothing and furniture and that sort of stuff. And it was just like, no, we don't want your used stuff. That's not helpful to us. Basically, we need money in order to kind of support ourselves and go back that way. So that was one of the reasons there. So what's next? What's next here? Most people agree that we need to do something more or something different, probably especially after COVID. Most people also think it does not do much to help. Why? What concerns do they have? So a lot of them believe that a lot of the money is wasted. The money only goes to the huge aid industry. It is used politically, both as giver and the receiver. Only the rich end up with the money in the countries that receive it. And all these things contribute to aid fatigue. So that's the feeling that people get tired of it, and less help is going out because of it. So the problem here is that for all the money you donate to an organization, they take a cut in order to keep the organization running, which is not fair. So not all of your money is going to help what you want it to help. There's also people who abuse the aid systems here in Canada as well. And if you are giving to a lot of charities, it can be tiring. It can be like with people constantly coming with their hand out. It's difficult because you need to survive as well. So it can be a hard thing on both sides of that, and that's where you get that aid fatigue. So the role of remittances, it's a vital role. Remember, money sent home to countries by migrants. We talked about this before, so that is the remittance. So you move for example, you move from India to Canada, and now you're sending money home to your family in India. The Canadian government sends $3.6 billion in foreign aid. Canadian residents have sent $15 billion to their native countries from Canada. So that's money they're making in Canada, and they're coming back, honestly, they're working, and they send it home. So this is a huge influence on economic, despite, and it's actually more helpful because it's going directly to the people that need it or the people that are being sent. But this can be both good and bad. So Canada gave $5.5 billion aid in 2014. That same year, $17 billion was sent out of the country in remittances. This is unofficial aid, and the money comes out of the Canadian economy and goes towards improving a targeted country. So you're losing money here. They're not spending the money here in Canada in the economy. It's going to a different economy. So that can be an issue as well. The Genie Index is a measure of the wealth distribution in the country. So if you look at our little chart here, you see who has the money, right? And we can see in terms of the distribution. So this is the distribution of the country. So 0 is ideal. That means everyone is equal. So if you have 0, so the lighter the country, the better the distribution of wealth. So for example, you see in Canada and in Australia, in kind of the old core countries, you've got a better distribution of wealth. Interestingly enough, though, if you look at America, you see a very different picture. They are not good in terms of distribution of wealth. And you might have seen this before. There is the 1%, because we looked at this before. So a lot of capitalism happening, a lot of billionaires in America, a lot of rich people getting richer. America is kind of an interesting case study, and we're going to look at this a little more when we kind of get into the final unit that looks more at specifically at the world issues. If you remember the Genie, in terms of one of the things I think that I've seen, and I've seen this tweet before, is the idea that America is a third world country wearing a Gucci belt, and that is such an idea for it. It makes so much sense when you hear it said like that, because that's exactly what it is. It is a third world country. America is such an odd place, because you have some of the richest people in the world and also like people living in extreme poverty. It's just wild, the difference that certain places are, and you could talk forever about America, but I'm not gonna talk about it too much. But anyway, I'm gonna carry on from that. But so that's you see kind of America as such an odd case study. Like some of them you expect in terms of Africa, and these are these developing countries and these periphery countries, but you don't really expect it in America, which is kind of an odd one. Okay. So I'm going to end off this lecture with the wealth inequality in America, which is a fantastic case study in terms of what I was just talking about. So I'll see you after the short film.
There's a chart I saw recently that I can't get out of my head. A Harvard business professor and economist asked more than 5,000 Americans how they thought wealth was distributed in the United States. This is what they said they thought it was. Dividing the country into 5 rough groups of the top, bottom, and middle 3 20% groups, they asked people how they thought the wealth in this country was divided. Then he asked them what they thought was the ideal distribution. And 92%, that's at least 9 out of 10 of them, said it should be more like this. In other words, more equitable than they think it is. Now that fact is telling, admittedly, the notion that most Americans know that the system is already skewed unfairly. But what's most interesting to me is the reality compared to our perception. The ideal is as far removed from our perception of reality as the actual distribution is from what we think exists in this country. So ignore the ideal for a moment. Here's what we think it is again. And here is the actual distribution. Shockingly skewed. Not only do the bottom 20% and the next 20%, the bottom 40% of Americans barely have any of the wealth. I mean, it's hard to even see them on the chart. But the top 1% has more of the country's wealth than 9 out of 10 Americans believe the entire top 20% should have. Mind-blowing. But let's look at it another way, because I find this chart kind of difficult to wrap my head around. Instead, let's reduce the 311 million Americans to just a representative 100 people. Make it simple. Here they are: teachers, coaches, firefighters, construction workers, engineers, doctors, lawyers, some investment bankers, a CEO, maybe a celebrity or two. Now let's line them up according to their wealth. Poorest people on the left, wealthiest on the right, just a steady row of folks based on their net worth. We'll color code them like we did before based on which 20% quintile they fall into. Now let's reduce the total wealth of the United States, which was roughly $54 trillion in 2009, to this symbolic pile of cash. And let's distribute it among our 100 Americans. Well, here's socialism, all the wealth of the country distributed equally. We all know that won't work. We need to encourage people to work and work hard to achieve that good old American dream and keep our country moving forward. So, here's that ideal we asked everyone about. Something like this curve. This isn't too bad. We've got some incentive, as the wealthiest folks are now about 10 to 20 times better off than the poorest Americans. But hey, even the poor folks aren't actually poor, since the poverty line has stayed almost entirely off the chart. We have a super healthy middle class with a smooth transition into wealth. And yes, Republicans and Democrats alike chose this curve. 9 out of 10 people, 92%, said this was a nice, ideal distribution of America's wealth. But let's move on. This is what people think America's wealth distribution actually looks like. Not as equitable, clearly, but for me, even this still looks pretty great. Yes, the poorest 20 to 30% are starting to suffer quite a lot compared to the ideal, and the middle class is certainly struggling more than they were, while the rich and wealthy are making roughly 100 times that of the poorest Americans and about 10 times that of the still healthy middle class. Sadly, this isn't even close to the reality. Here is the actual distribution of wealth in America. The poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change, and the middle class is barely distinguishable from the poor. In fact, even the rich between the top 10 and 20 percentile are worse off. Only the top 10% are better off. And how much better off? So much better off that the top 2 to 5% are actually off the chart at this scale. And the top 1%, this guy, well, his stack of money stretches 10 times higher than we can show. Here's his stack of cash, restacked, all by itself. This is the top 1% we've been hearing so much about. So much green in his pockets that I have to give him a whole new column of his own because he won't fit on my chart. 1% of America has 40% of all the nation's wealth. The bottom 80%, 8 out of every 10 people, or 80 out of these 100, only has 7% between them. And this has only gotten worse in the last 20 to 30 years. While the richest 1% take home almost a quarter of the national income today, in 1976, they took home only 9%, meaning their share of income has nearly tripled in the last 30 years. The top 1% own half the country's stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. The bottom 50% of Americans own only 0.5% of these investments, which means they aren't investing. They're just scraping by. I'm sure many of these wealthy people have worked very hard for their money. But do you really believe that the CEO is working 380 times harder than his average employee? Not his lowest paid employee, not the janitor, but the average earner in his company. The average worker needs to work more than a month to earn what the CEO makes in 1 hour. We certainly don't have to go all the way to socialism to find something that is fair for hardworking Americans. We don't even have to achieve what most of us consider might be ideal. All we need to do is wake up and realize that the reality in this country is not at all what we think it is.
Okay, so just to end this off, and like you saw this inequality in America, which is kind of staggering. Uh, this is something that's been ongoing. We're in 2020, and it's even worse now. If anything, it's even worse in America, and we can talk about America for days, and I'm sure we will. But that's it for the economic disparity, and that's it for this lecture. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.